What's up, everybody? Welcome into a special edition of SSPN Postgame that is technically like a fourth quarter game. That
Right.
was that was the best that I could come up with right there. But the game is still going on. But since me and Ethan have our responsibilities during the week, we figured we'll start a little bit early for preseason. Probably during the season, we'll go back to just strictly post game where everything's wrapped up. But for these preseason games, I think we'll probably pop in here around the fourth quarter just to talk about what we've seen. And what I will say to start off, if you do not know, the Spurs are in a little bit of a tight one here with the Oklahoma City Thunder, 92-86 at about the 9:57 mark. Riley Minix getting his first minutes right now. I'm seeing Ethan. I've got the game pulled up. Ethan's got the box score pulled up. Brandon Boston just took his first three as well in the left corner. Harrison Ingram on the floor also. So naturally, in the fourth quarter, all of our potential two-way guys are on the floor, which is another reason why we kind of decided to go live during the fourth quarter of these preseason games. But that was my spiel there, Ethan, just kind of updating everybody on where we're at in the game and whatnot. But what have been your thoughts so far from this first look at the 24-25 San Antonio Spurs?
Well, everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. It's a preseason game for
Right.
one, but then we're also playing without Victor, without Devin, without Chris Paul, Zach Collins, Bassey. I think I may have missed one guy, but obviously very undersized the entire time against Chet Holmgren, Hartenstein, and then the rest of the Oklahoma City Thunder team. And they're a competitive bunch. They're a team that should be a top four team in the West, and then obviously we finished really poorly last year at the bottom of the West. But with all that being said, I think we look pretty good, Jude. I think the offense looks very free flowing. There's a lot of movement. There's not a lot of wasted movement either. Harrison Barnes, through only 20 minutes of play, sure, he only went 2 of 8 from the field, but his presence, his impact was felt most when he wasn't scoring the ball. But when he was facilitating dribble handoffs, cutting to the basket, and just making really smart connective plays on both sides of the ball. So his impact was definitely felt early. It felt like we were playing aggressively, moving the rock. And defensively, I think there was definitely an uptick in individual play. It's hard to tell about the team defense because it's so different from what we're going to see in the regular season. But overall, pretty satisfied with what I saw.
Yeah, I would say the same thing too. We're not trying to sit here and just sound like complete Spurs homers. There's definitely things that you can pick out in this game that were some negatives for sure. And we'll get into that throughout this show. I'm kind of watching this game as we talk, Ethan, because we are getting some stops. And as much as this isn't, even now for the Thunder, they've kind of got their fourth quarter preseason guys on the floor. We may have a chance to win here. Harrison Ingram just got a steal. CeeDee's running a transition, gives it back to Harrison. He misses the three, unfortunately, but just makes another heads-up play after that. Oh, they're not going to give CeeDee a bucket here. Not to just do play-by-play this whole time, but I did want to update the people and kind of talk about what's going on in the game as well. 92-88 now, so just a 4-point game with 8 minutes left, and the young guys are out there hustling. But back to Harrison Barnes, which what you talked about to open here. I think that kind of is one of the bigger takeaways, if you can have any, from this preseason game. But you definitely noticed Harrison's veteran presence, just knowing what to do. I think there was a stat that you sent me a while back, Ethan. Maybe it wasn't you, or I think it was actually one of my friends, my other big, huge Spurs fan friends. So sorry for mistaking you there. But he sent me a stat about Harrison Barnes, like driving to the basket. I want to say like he was behind Giannis. He's like top 3 or top 2 in like fouls drawn when he gets to the basket. I may not be describing that stat exactly right. I don't think I am. Honestly, I'd have to go look back at what it is. But the point is, you saw some dribble drives where he went inside. I think he did get to the line twice. Do you have the box score up, right?
Yes, I do. He did get to the line twice. He went
Yeah.
once. 1 for 2.
Okay, so only once, but there were a couple times where he would drive inside and kind of have penetration, which would lead
Hmm.
to some other threes as well. But mainly, like you said, kind of the connective things um, and just the veteran experience. It's hard to describe, in tonight's game, but you could definitely feel that guys kind of were a little bit positioned better, and just Harrison being out there and being in the right spot, kind of in a sense like forced other guys to be in the right spot, if that makes sense. Like him positioning himself spacing wise, just kind of everybody helps everybody else because if he's in the right place, that like almost forces the spacing, to be better than what it would be if he wasn't out there.
For sure. Spacing was definitely night and day with him on the court versus not on the court. And I'm not saying it was terrible when he wasn't there, but he definitely makes a difference in that regard. And I think we're going to see a lot more from him as a primary ball handler than maybe we had
Uh
expected.
huh.
Because he took a lot of
Yes.
guys off the dribble, a lot of pick and roll ball handling duties, and finding
Uh
guys
huh.
in the open corner, like you said, able to draw two as he attacks the rim. Because he's actually a lot bigger too. Like I knew he was 6'8", but he looks taller and longer than I had anticipated. And our team as a whole really looks taller and longer too. Part of that's probably because we had Julian Champagnie, who's normally a three
Mm-hmm.
four, playing the shooting guard spot tonight. And I think he was another guy that we have to talk about his game tonight, going 6 for 13 from three. Early, it looked like he was going to struggle for a little bit because I think he missed like three in a row, and I was like, "Uh oh, Julian, you better you better stop shooting them." But thankfully, I'm not a coach for the Spurs, and he kept shooting them, and he started to knock them down. 22 points from him tonight as a floor spacer, looking more and more like a Danny Green, as well as 7 rebounds tonight for him.
Yeah, the thing that I noticed, excuse me, we were just talking about Julian,
Yes,
obviously.
Julian.
Again, 100 to 93 here. Still Spurs hanging around. It's I feel bad like talking about, oh, are they going to come back in this preseason game? But we'll have to see over the next couple minutes. We've kind of just been hanging around behind the rest of the Thunder. Nathan Mensah now in for the Spurs, as
Hmm.
well as Malachi Flynn. So this really kind of is, maybe a preview of the Austin Spurs, if anything,
Yeah.
that's on the floor right now. But going back to Julian, man, we'll see what happens with the rotations, but I think tonight is just an example of how he can kind of fit into any lineup and just be that guy that you can't leave open. And if you do leave him open, he's going to make guys pay. Yes, it wasn't the most, like if you look at the last thing that I saw for him on threes, correct me, on the box score was 6 for 12.
He was 6 for 13.
Okay, so he took one more, missed it, right? That might not look like the greatest thing, but that's still like close to 50% from three. Um,
Hmm.
on a high volume. So, I mean, you've got to give him a little bit of credit there. And obviously, some of those threes definitely bailed us out on some offensive possessions as well. Again, it just kind of reminds us what Julian is. And it seems like he's just getting more comfortable in that role.
Yeah, and a lot of those shots were contested too when I
Mm-hmm.
think back on it. So his release looks even quicker than it was last year, and his arc looks a little bit higher as well. Like his shots were dropping in more, where last year he was kind of either hitting front rim or back iron. That wasn't as noticeable this go around. I think he's got a lot more lift and a lot more jump on
Mm-hmm.
his 3-point shot as well. And I want him taking those. If he finishes every game with 13 threes taken, I'm fine with that because what that tells
Right.
me is Victor's getting doubled, Chris Paul's finding him in the corner, and he's getting wide open looks. So I want him taking those.
Absolutely. I think one of the other guys that stood out for me tonight is your boy Blake Wesley,
Yeah.
Ethan. Man, even from the jump before he started making some plays later in the game, just his handle looked a lot more controlled. Um, I mean, we've seen the pass vision tonight. Obviously, the
Hmm.
defense is always there. We saw him hit a tough contested three in the right corner. But man, he just looks really, really controlled tonight
Yeah.
offensively. Not saying everything's perfect, but his pass vision looks improved. And again, his handle is much more controlled. So when you're able to hone some of those things and combine that with his speed and his intensity, again, this is just one preseason game. It's the very first preseason game, but it looks like some improvements there from Blake.
Yeah, defensively, we knew what he was last year. He looks even quicker, if that's even possible. Last year, he
Mhm.
was like a flash, and this year, he's barely even visible when he's moving on the court. And his lateral quickness looks even sharper, so that's great to see from him. And I'm glad that despite having another year under his belt, he hasn't like kind of fallen back on his defensive
Right.
intensity. If anything, it's gone to another level. And just to read out his stats: 3 points, 7 assists, 2 steals, 4 rebounds, 18 minutes of play, only 1 turnover. To your point, very controlled offense for him. And I think Stefon Castle, and Malachi Branham really played well off of each other in that toward the end of the second quarter as well as
Mhm.
in the third quarter. They didn't have a lot of
Yes.
time, the three of them together, but they looked fairly solid, and I felt like Blake and Steph really kind of played off of each other well as like, okay, it's your turn, it's my turn. Come set a pick for me.
Mhm.
They really had a nice chemistry there as well as with Malachi shooting threes.
Yeah, and the 7 assists again, ever with everything we say tonight, take it with the asterisk
True.
of first preseason game, and
Yes.
it's also a preseason game. But the 7 assists for Blake really stands out, especially when you look at everything else that he had on the floor. So honestly, for Adrian's comment here at the beginning, he says, "Can't watch this game. What's the best part of this game?" I would say Blake Wesley for me, man.
Mm.
I know it's not, like a crazy scoring stat line or anything, but when you talk about like our preseason um position breakdowns where we're like, okay, where can Blake Wesley get better? Tonight, basically all those areas you kind of saw what you wanted to see there.
Right. I think Blake definitely has a case for that. Somebody else that we haven't mentioned yet, I think, is Mamu Kelashvili. He only had 3 rebounds. This is his biggest negative. Only
Uh-huh.
3 rebounds, and definitely got bullied by Hartenstein, Chet Holmgren, and the rest of the bigs for OKC. Like, he's not going to be a backup center. I still
Right.
think that needs to be addressed, whether that's Bassie or Zach Collins. Only time will tell. But as a backup 4 spot, going 3 for 4 from three, really
Mhm.
fluid shot, no hesitation for him, confident taking it to the rim as well, and playmaking. He had 14 points tonight, 3 rebounds, assist, a steal on 4 for 5 shooting in 18 minutes of play.
Yeah, and the thing that you've got to view this prism in is this is Mamu going up against Hartenstein,
Hmm.
like in, in a preseason game. You know what I mean? Where
Yep.
he's probably not going to be in that position moving forward. But the threes and the fluidity on the shot, I jokingly texted you. I was like, this is why when we talked about, putting that side by side of Jeremy and Sandro Mamukelashvili's jumpers together, that despite the percentages, you can tell
Hmm.
which one is more fluid. You kind of saw that tonight, but also want to give a shout out to Jeremy. I know he missed the other step back that he was kind of forced to take late in the shot clock, but the
Hmm.
first three that he made, even though it was wide open, regardless, when, like he said in media day, the elbow is much more tight. And it looks like there's a little bit more lift on the ball. And even the step back three, I didn't think he was going to make it under those circumstances. Like, even if we're hoping Jeremy improves, like I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting him to make that step
Going
back
left
three.
too.
Right. But it didn't miss like horribly. Like he didn't like I feel like if that's last season, that's an air ball.
Right. No, for sure. I think in 21 minutes for him to go 4 for 7, hit the 1 3 that was like actually what he'll be getting
Right.
in real minutes, 9 points, 6 boards, 4 assists. Like tonight was a really solid game from Jeremy, I felt. I think if there's only one negative to take away from him, it's, finding easier ways to score. And with that being said, he was still 4 for 7, but I still feel like
Right.
he kind of had to force his offense a little bit at times.
Yes.
And
Yes.
maybe that's Chris Paul coming in that'll kind of fix itself, as well as Victor attracting attention. But just finding more fluid ways to get baskets. Otherwise, classic Swiss Army knife Jeremy game.
Yeah, and in the third quarter, there were some possessions where he was in the post and he kind of almost faked like he was going to go get a bucket, and that led to a wide open bucket for Keldon. And then
Hmm.
there was also a really
Trey.
nice cut from Tre Jones, and that was
Yep.
kind of in traffic where Tre Jones finished. It wasn't like there was a crazy contest, but it wasn't just like, oh, I can just lackadaisically pass this in here, and there's not going to be three or four hands because that's that's what
Right.
was there. So to see him kind of have a little bit more post control as well as have some vision there too was another thing that I liked from Jeremy. Let me go to my notes here and see if there's anything else that I have from him. No, it was mainly just finding
Yeah.
people on cuts out of the post. Um, But the other thing that I noticed from Jeremy, this was very early in the game in the first quarter. There was like a time where he got the ball on the right wing, I believe, right by the Frost Bank Center logo. And, maybe last year, if he had that much space, he would have immediately pulled up and took the three. But
Mhm.
instead, he kind of pump faked and drove inside. And I forget exactly what happened on that possession, but I believe it ended up leading to a bucket. And even if it didn't, that was still the right decision from Jeremy Sochan there because it created some penetration. He wasn't forcing up something, that isn't his first game. And at the end of the day, like that's going to be better for the offense than him taking an open three early in the shot clock.
I think that's a great point about Jeremy, but also it works for the rest of the team as well. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like the decision making from everybody was improved compared to last year. I know again, one game
Right.
preseason, no victor, but and I also there was like lulls in this game where we couldn't score, especially kind of toward the end of that first quarter. It-
Yeah.
But despite that lull, it was really just we didn't have anybody to take charge and go get a bucket, but we were still playing good. Like I felt like we were still making the right decision, dribble handoffs, running our offense, cutting at the right moment, shooting at the right moment. We just couldn't find the basket, and that's going to happen. I think with Victor, with Devin, with Chris Paul, those things hopefully, knock on wood, fix themselves. But overall, I felt like the decision making was much improved.
Yeah, I'll get into some of that, especially off the ball. That was something that I noticed throughout the game. And again, we're still not even running anything, especially in this game. This is
Yeah.
very free flowing, really similar to last year, to
Hmm.
be honest with you. But even then, even in that same context of last year, I felt like off the ball, we were more intentional with our movement
Yeah.
and the spacing was better overall. And again, that kind of ties into what the point I was making with Harrison earlier. Like if one guy's positioning himself in the right place, like when you compare it to last year, that
Yeah.
means that somebody else who maybe thought they should have been there, isn't going to be there. So automatically, on top of I saw Keldon moving. Keldon and Jeremy were the two ones that I noticed in the beginning as well. I mean, I'm saying that them two mainly, but also Julian factors into that
Yeah.
with all of the open threes that he had. But he's much more kind of hanging around the perimeter, where Keldon and Jeremy might have to maneuver themselves close to the basket, and then depending on what's going on with the rest of the offense, adjust themselves. So I saw more of the adjustment, and it was like, okay, they actually knew where they were going. They had
Right.
intention. Okay, I know what's going on. Let me make sure that I'm not clogging up whatever else is going on. There was one time where Harrison kind of drove inside and it was kind of clogged next to Jeremy at the elbow in the first quarter. But still, again, one preseason game. I know we keep saying that, but I just feel like I need to keep saying that because I remember last year, I think we played the Rockets game one, and we felt like so good coming out of it, and we saw everything else that ensued. So we're not trying to put too much stock into this, but it did feel like guys, even in a free flowing offense, knew how to space the floor better and keep things unclogged.
For sure. And yes, it is first preseason game, but it still felt pretty decently competitive, I would say. I feel like we played our actual rotational players a little bit longer than I had
Yeah,
anticipated. Same for OKC. So I feel like maybe there's a little bit of a rivalry there. Um, and Oklahoma City's defense needs to be something that we speak about too, because they are long, they are aggressive, they were picking at the ball all game long, and yet still weren't flustered entirely. And as I look at the box
we
score
may
now,
have
it's a
a
four
comeback.
point game,
Yes.
111 to 107. Thunder up with 17 seconds left in the game. Um, do you want to? Is it a timeout right now, Jude?
Here,
Do we have the
they
ball?
they got the ball on the floor. There's a shot clock. We're down 4. Um, oh, okay, we fouled. I wasn't sure if we got a steal.
Hmm.
This is gonna be tough. I don't know if like we're gonna have. I mean, we're probably gonna have to get a basket and then foul. That
Yeah,
would be so funny if this went to overtime.
I doubt it. I
I
doubt
doubt,
it.
I doubt it too. But Malachi Flynn hit a three, and then he got a steal and got a wide open layup there at the end.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what that little 5-0 run from Malachi Flynn right there is kind of what
Hmm.
made this a 4-point game. But with the foul, I think that turns off the shot clock. So yes, we fouled them. Oklahoma City is at the free throw line. They missed the first one. Okay. We'll get back to our conversation here, guys, but we're gonna keep you guys updated on what happens at the end of this one in San Antonio. I thought
Hmm.
this was in OKC for some reason. Got a nice shot of Wemby in between Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul. They make the second. So Malachi Flynn is going to have to drain another 3 here for us to have a chance. He goes inside. Is it a turnover? I don't know what that was. Maybe it's a kicked ball. We got 11 seconds left, though.
Well, while you watch that,
keep going. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to mention a couple more guys that I feel like we haven't touched on enough yet. And Keldon Johnson tonight, 23 minutes, 3 of 6 from the field, missed the only 3 that he took. Still managed to finish with 8 points, 3 rebounds, and an assist. I think those numbers are a little misleading. Sergio, what were we going to say?
No, you're good. Riley Minix just almost hit a dagger 3, but unfortunately it rolled out. So it looks like the Spurs are going to lose this one 112 to 107.
Honestly, good game overall.
If you
want the reasons why, go back to the beginning of the video. But anyway, Keldon, I think his numbers are a little misleading. I don't think he played poorly. He was -8 in the plus minus. I don't think that that's true. He definitely looks springier, looks a little quicker, bouncier. Defensively, obviously it's only one game, but it definitely looks like it's more of a focus for him. I didn't see as many lapses, but also he wasn't defending Shea. He was defending Isaiah Joe, maybe, right? So it's kind of hard to measure. But physically, he looks like he will be more able to stick with some of the quicker guards. But he also hasn't really lost the strength. He was able to take it aggressively to the cup, finish like he normally does by putting his shoulder into his defender and taking it strong to the rim. So Keldon will continue to be Keldon. Hopefully the unique physique is allowing him to play better defense as well.
That was something that I noticed too. Again, I was going to preface, and you just said it, and I've said it so many times. We're not sitting here saying that Keldon is for sure like, oh my gosh, he's perfect on defense now. We're just saying in the first game that he did look a little bit better. I felt the same thing. I'm trying to figure out exactly. Yeah, that was literally exactly what I had written down as one of my points was Keldon's defense is looking better. It wasn't perfect, but it definitely looked, kind of like with the off-ball point, it looked more intentional. He looked more competent, for lack of a better term. But when I say competent, I just mean like understanding of like, okay, this is what usually happens in certain situations. And there was one play, I think this possession actually led to an OKC basket or a foul. But Tre Jones and Keldon, it was early in the game, and Chet was still in, I'm pretty sure. And there was like a switch, like right by the 3-point line, kind of on the right elbow for OKC. And Tre was matched up against Chet, and they switched like the first opportunity that it happened. And that was something last year where I don't think that would have happened. Again, one preseason game, when the intensity is upped in the regular season, I'm sure we're still going to see missed rotations and missed switches and mismatches, but that didn't like happen at all last year. So to see them, like, it was like a very fluid switch too. And like I said, I think OKC ended up getting fouled or like still got points out of that possession, but that switch is something that sticked out of my mind with Keldon and Tre Jones specifically, who, if you go back to the beginning of last year, those were two guys that honestly we were kind of criticizing a lot, specifically on the defensive end. So that was nice to see. You kind of talked about it. You're not sure how much to take away, but it seems like the communication and the team defense, it seems like at the least, if we don't want to go off on a limb and say better, we can at least say that everybody's kind of more aware of what's going on around them defensively.
I think that's a really good way to temper the expectations, through one preseason game. But you spoke a little bit about Tre there, and just to give him some recognition, 6 points, 4 assists, 2 rebounds in 20 minutes, 2 for 5, missed the 1-3 that he took. I need some more minutes with him and Stefon before I make a judgment call. Really expect one game, but Blake and Stefon looked really good. And individually, Blake looked fantastic, pushing the tempo, playing great defense, and playing under control. So, I just need to see more minutes from Tre Jones, because just through one game, a little underwhelmed with how he did. I wasn't expecting anything crazy, but just compared to what Blake was able to do, Blake's competing. And at the end of the day, Pop's going to play the guy that competes and proves that he, deserves the backup spot. So that's an interesting storyline to kind of keep your eyes on. And just to reiterate, Blake also played against worse players than Tre did tonight. So we have to take that into consideration as well.
And I think another factor with that conversation, and I think Stefon's good. Before I say this, I think Stefon is going to get minutes regardless this
Mm-hmm.
season. But
Same.
that's the other thing here too. Maybe it's not even Blake taking minutes away from Tre Jones. Maybe he earns the backup 2 spot.
He could, and that kind of takes us to Stefon Castle, who
Right.
had 5 points tonight, 2-3 from the field, 19 minutes, an insane dunk. Thank you, Wemby's Castle, for being in here always in the comments. We appreciate you. But yeah, that was a crazy dunk. He was +6 in the box score. He's one of the few guys that was actually plus tonight, but he did have 6 turnovers. And he
Mhm.
didn't necessarily look for his shot. Not something that we necessarily want him to do. Just saying in preseason, maybe you expect a little bit more aggressiveness, but he looked tough. He looked strong, taking it to the basket. Didn't get an opportunity on the in between game. But as a playmaker, he did look solid. Just
Mhm.
get those turnovers under control.
Yeah, and one of those turnovers was, I mean, and again, I say one of those turnovers, that's still 5 turnovers there, right?
Mhm.
So I overall, I completely agree with you. But that lob to CD, where I believe it was J Dub who maybe drew the charge, maybe it wasn't J Dub, but it was a Thunder player who was able to draw the charge like late, and it was like Stefon barely tapped him, but the dude
Yeah,
did have his feet set. You know, it was
that
it
was
was
really
right.
disappointing.
It was the right call, but really that was, that was not like Stefon Castle charging in. That was, an experienced NBA player kind of being cheeky there. And as he should, like that was, you call that by the rule.
Mhm.
But that was really, a nice vision and a nice assist. And I see what you're saying there too. Didn't really look for his shot too much tonight. I know that Malachi also in that first, series in the second quarter when they came out, or when they were all on the floor together. Or actually, was Stefon on the floor together in the second quarter?
I don't remember if they definitely played together, but I think that might have been a third quarter situation.
Yeah. The point I was trying to get to is I was just going to say Malachi was taking a lot of shots
Yes,
in
he
the
was.
second unit at the beginning of the game. And honestly, they weren't hitting kind of until the second half.
True.
Got to give a shout out to Malachi, at least for the second half bounce back, because in the first half, it was a little rough from my perspective. I was kind of getting a little frustrated because I kind of wanted anybody else on the floor to get a shot. Now that I'm thinking about it, there was a little bit of minutes. It was more mainly in the third quarter, like you talked about earlier. But in the second quarter, there was one lineup where I believe it was Blake, Malachi, Mamu, Stefon,
CD.
and CD, right? And I was just kind of like, he was taking all these shots, and I was just like, can we get it to anybody else right now?
Right.
Just to get some ball movement. But he took some good shots in the second half, and definitely took a step up from that first half as well. Um, but yeah, we're talking about Malachi and Stefon.
Mhm.
Um, but I
Yeah.
forget where I was going with it.
I think we had kinda moved past Steph and gone to Malachi Branham, unless you
Okay.
had another point about Steph?
No, not really. I mean, I
Okay.
guess I think the other thing I was gonna say, you still had the 5 turnovers, you had some nice plays. He wasn't looking, this is what I was getting to. He wasn't looking for his shot that much, but he was kind of letting everybody else,
Right.
do their thing. He kinda knew his role as a rookie in his first game.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I like the vision, had a nice and one, or I don't know if it was an and one, but it was a tough bucket, kinda inside that he got off the glass on the interior. We saw that throughout the UConn tape, so that was nice to see. And then, of course, like we just mentioned, the dunk was obviously the highlight of the night, maybe for the game, but definitely for Stefon. So, I think first NBA minutes, it's going to be a little bit different than Summer League. I'm not really too worried about Stefon Castle. You see the feel for the game he has, who he is as a defender. He's going to get got in rookie situations and make rookie mistakes this year. But again, even from what I saw tonight, even with the turnovers, it's just like, okay, this is stuff he's easily going to clean up.
For sure. I agree with you about everything that you said, especially with his feel for the game. Despite not looking for his shot, he was still able to find a lot of open guys in the corner coming off of pick and roll situations. He had a nice drop off pass, and he had a really nice change of pace when attacking the rim. I noted that. That was one of the time when he got fouled. They actually went to the free throw line. It was a change of pace on Hartenstein, who's a really good rim protector and was able to get to the line almost at the end one, not
Mm-hmm.
quite. So I'm not worried about him. But touching on Malachi, he wasn't efficient, 5 for 14, 2 of 8 from 3. But those 2 threes were back-to-back threes that really kind of pushed the momentum in our favor in the third quarter. I think one was from Stefon and one was from Blake. So they both got an assist, if I'm not mistaken, off of those 2 threes. And, I like his confidence. I feel like he was more aggressive and a little more physical attacking the rim than he was last year. He wasn't settling for as much finesse mid-range jump shots. He needs to work on that efficiency, but I feel like once he kind of got into rhythm, he definitely looked better. So if he can continue that next game, come out a little less cold, come out firing, then I won't be too worried about Malachi.
Yeah. I just I want I don't want him every time he gets the ball to think he needs to shoot.
That's fair.
That's the last thing that I will say about Malachi. I don't want to criticize him too much because again, as we're saying with this, if I'm going to sit here with Stefon Castle and be like, yeah, I know he's a third year player, but he's still someone who's like 21 years old, you know. And we came into this season still thinking Malachi is developing. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm going to have them under that same mindset, I've got to give him credit for bouncing back a little bit there and also realize it's just one preseason game,
Yeah.
as well. And again, the things that I didn't like from him in the first half, I didn't see as much in the second half. And on top of that, he executed making the shots. So I like to see that a lot.
Yeah. I think they
Also, go ahead.
sorry. I think they took the ball out of his hands because they played him
Yeah,
next to
you're
Steph
right.
and next to Blake, and suddenly he was a lot better.
You're so right. I mean, that's I couldn't have put it better myself. And that honestly helped, some of the things, like I said, where I'm thinking, hey, like every time you get the ball, don't immediately think to shoot it. When you
Mhm.
take the ball out of his hands like that, it mitigates that issue, but it also opens up better looks for him, which he executed on. So
For sure.
want to have the context here as much as I can get frustrated. We also want to acknowledge the good that we saw as well. And I also want to acknowledge all of you guys being in here. Spurs Spotlight with Chris is in here. He's got a YouTube channel on the Spurs. Y'all go check out his stuff. We appreciate you being in here. Cowboy Tanaka, John G was in here a while ago. Of course, Wemby's Castle. He's been making some points earlier, and I believe he was at the game. If from what I saw on Twitter was correct, I saw some
Mm.
videos from Wemby's Castle. So shout out to you being in here after being in the game. And one of the things that he wanted to harp on is I loved what I saw with the ball movement when Barnes was on the floor. Game changer. Just imagine CP3, Barnes, Wemby, and Devin
Right.
out there for sure. Because if with this unit, if we can feel an impact with Harrison Barnes, with those three guys, I mean, that's going to, up the ante a lot. Again, just a preseason game, but still, I mean, you saw the little nooks and crannies and inklings of experience. I know we touched on that earlier, but when you throw those guys in there as well, we're going to be running a competent offense. That's not saying we're going to be running a championship or best in the West offense, but in comparison to last year, we will be running a competent offense.
For sure. And just to go kind of on top of that, we really need Bassie and Collins to play the rest of the preseason because it's impossible to truly measure our team defense without an actual competent big. Like I felt so bad for Mamu. Yeah, yeah, exactly. We need to see who the backup center is going to be. We need to see if Zach's fixed his jump shot. We need to see how Bassie just looks in general because we haven't seen him in what feels like 2 years.
Right.
So they both need to get some meaningful time.
Yeah, that is definitely something that we're going to be looking at for the rest of the preseason. Unfortunately, Ethan, remember Charles Bassey will not play this preseason because of him coming off the injury. So yeah, that's a thing that, only really the Spurs know in training camp. But hopefully we'll at least get to see a little bit of Zach and just some minutes with Mamu at the 4 as well for that
Yeah,
too.
for sure. For sure.
Robert Ball brings up an interesting question, and this is something that I
Yeah.
thought about almost from the beginning of the game. I texted Ethan this, but Robert Ball says, do you think Julian made a case for starting at the 2 tonight? Me and Ethan, talked about in the midst of Devin Vassell's injury, where he'll be out for the first 5 games of the regular season. We thought it will either be Malachi Branham or Julian Champagnie in that starting lineup. The note that I will make tonight is that Julian Champagnie was listed as a guard, and was in the starting lineup. So
Mm-hmm.
that is definitely something to watch. And I think what he showed tonight as well, kind of ties into that role that we would want him to have in those first 5 games of the season. But,
Mhm.
Malachi showed a little bit of that in the second half as well. I think I would still roll with Champagnie there. But that's just my opinion.
I think I might have been swayed tonight by Julian. Only one game, but the way he was
Right.
spacing the floor, his defense, his rebounding, I think he doesn't take away from the rest of the guys, like you had mentioned in our last video. I think he deserves the nod at the starting two, and it also will give me more time to examine the Malachi Steph relationship because I'm assuming that Malachi would get minutes in that situation off of the bench, so that will allow him to kind of embrace that scorer's mentality in a way and see if the chemistry he has with that bench unit warrants him getting rotational minutes this year.
Yeah, man, the lineups are so interesting because
Yeah.
when we're talking about this, what if we just roll Keldon out there at the 2?
I don't think that would happen
Mhm.
just because is he a better floor spacer than Julian? Not necessarily.
No, right.
Is he a better off the dribble scorer than Malachi? Maybe.
Mhm.
But I think what Keldon does best isn't necessarily what we have missing with Devin out. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. I'm just because I'm thinking like in a world where okay, if Malachi's coming off the bench, because we were honestly like with our lineup predictions, we had Blake and Malachi
Yeah,
in the third string.
true.
So if that does happen, I mean, like maybe you could even see some lineups with Tre, Malachi, Steph, Keldon,
Yeah,
Zach, or something like that. I think we want Mamu on the floor too, though.
I
But
do.
it all comes down to competition at the end of the day. Pop mentioned it in his press conference, and we're not trying to sit here like, oh, anything could happen, so we don't make some concrete prediction. But it's like with training camp, with the Spurs track record, that
Yep.
really is kind of what's happening with this team this year.
Yeah, I truly don't think we will know until game one, October 24th, in the American Airlines Center
Right.
against the Dallas Mavericks. That's when we will truly know what the starting and bench unit looks like.
For sure. For sure. But I think everything is up for grabs, I think is the biggest point that we can
Yeah.
take away from this. Like when we're talking about all these potential lineups and maybe guys stepping into roles or earning those minutes, they're competing for them. And I
Mhm.
think to kind of sum up this conversation, not to repeat something I said earlier, but what I'll say is that I think that Blake, out of all the guys competing for minutes, is the one who stood out the most to me tonight.
I would agree with that assessment.
Yes, sir. Well, here, let me get to some other things that I wrote down, and then we'll kind of wrap this post game up. And we'll be back Wednesday against the Magic. We'll do the same thing that we did here. I wasn't sure around what time the fourth quarter would be, so I set it to 9. I'm sure a lot of you guys saw, like, oh, they're already live. That's just because we're going to go live at when the fourth quarter starts in these preseason games. So just a heads up for every preseason post game that we do for the rest of the year. But I'll just read my notes off. We've talked about some of this already, but there was some other stuff that I didn't get to that I wrote down during the game. So the first thing, and this is kind of in chronological order, Keldon and Harrison Barnes had a nice give and go that led to an open 3 in the corner. Good ball movement despite free flowing preseason offense. We kind of touched on that. I think that was something that kind of you saw with that first unit for the most of the game. Not perfect, but better ball movement than last season. And again, a lot of that has to do with Harrison, like we talked about. I mentioned this earlier, not perfect, but noticing more intentional off ball movement when guys are driving to the rim, et cetera, et cetera. We had that good start and then that ugly run, after that first, I believe the Thunder went on like a 12-0 run or something like that after we had a little bit of a lead to start the game. But still, we bounced back after that. Blake looks good handling the ball and rebounding, more controlled, and the speed shows. Obviously, Mamu's threes as well were something that stood out. Again, that Blake 3, the one shot that he hit all game was a contested 3 in the right corner. That was like an absolute splash. And again, it was contested. That was really nice to see from Blake. Again, it's just one. And again, with his passing ability and him moving the ball in transition and setting things up and even creating looks by driving to the rim, that led to the 7 assists for him tonight. Obviously, Champagnie's shooting was something that helped out our offense. Keldon's defense looked a little bit better. And then we saw some good things from Jeremy out of the post as well. So again, some of that I might have already repeated, but I just kind of wanted to get all of that out here before we wrap things up.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Well, we appreciate all of you guys being in here. Let me see some of the comments that we've got in here. Cowboy Tanaka, we appreciate you. TG Canoes and Kayaks, we appreciate you, my man. He says this season is to see what the young guys are keepers and can keep up with Vic as he grows, for sure. I mean, that was kind of the point that we were just making. Everything's up for grabs with that. So we're definitely it's going to be interesting to evaluate these guys over the next 4 games and then really see how things are looking when the regular season starts. Spurs Spotlight with Chris also says Mamu continuing to make a case for the backup 4. That was me and Ethan's pick in the backup rotation for who would play power forward. And yeah, that was pretty much it. Here we go. Swatcho Bros in here. He says Champagnie is Wemby's Robin confirmed.
Robin with 2 B's.
I love to see it, Swatcho Bros. Shout out to you still with the Jonathan Simmons profile pic. We love to see that. Robert Ball in the comments as well. John G was in here very early. For some reason, I can't pull up his comment on our streaming software, but he was in here like early in the day just saying, go Spurs, go. Excited for the episode. Mansley, I don't know. Million Gnu. A lot of our regulars here, Ethan, showing back up. So I just wanted to kind of go through chat here and say what's up to everybody because we truly do appreciate you guys being back for this season, and we're excited for Wednesday.
Couldn't have said it better.
Any final thoughts, Ethan?
No, sir. I think you summarized it beautifully.
Alrighty, y'all. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all in the next one. We will see you guys this Wednesday. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like button below and the subscribe button. And if you want to stay updated with the show, follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. Go Spurs, go. We're